Hello everyone and welcome back to Railways Explained. We explored how the railway emerged, how it developed, how it was nationalized and later privatized. And now, almost 2 years later, we're returning to that story. But this time we're looking at something new, a move toward because in the very year that marks 200 years since the birth of the modern railway, the United Kingdom is once again undergoing a major transformation of its railway system. It could be said that the government is on its way to establishing a single public-lined entity called Great British Railways, GBR, by bringing together both infrastructure management and train operations under one roof. GBR is expected to replace the decades-old and very British rail franchising model. Of course, if you haven't watched those earlier videos, we warmly recommend checking them out. The links will be in the description. Now, this major shift in the way Britain governs its railways didn't come out of nowhere. It was first announced back in 2021, right after the COVID crisis, which caused a dramatic collapse in revenue and effectively ended the franchise model. The government had to step in and take over the financial risks of running passenger rail services, exposing just how fragile and fragmented the system had become after decades of multiple operators, franchises, and complex contractual arrangements. As the Secretary of State for Transport put it in a recent statement, the declining public trust and pride in today's railway in Britain are symptoms of a system which has lost sight of the very people and customers it is meant to serve. A railway that for 3 decades has been focused on contracts and codes rather than the needs of its customers and taxpayers. Therefore, Britain deserves a railway fit for its future. And since we believe that the future of the cradle of railways is always worth discussing on this channel, get ready for a deep dive. But before we start, we want to sincerely thank all our supporters on Patreon and everyone who purchased our Your support is absolutely essential for keeping Railways Explained alive. YouTube doesn't exactly reward niche topics like ours, so every single patron and every person who has bought the book means the world to us. Thank you so much. Now, under this reform, the British government aims to improve reliability, safety, accessibility, and the overall quality of rail services. Ticketing and fares, often criticized for being overly complicated, are set to be simplified, digitalized, and harmonized by consolidating multiple organizations, such operators, infrastructure managers, and regulators into one streamlined structure. Great British Railways aims to reduce duplication, improve coordination, and deliver value for money. This also should mean long-term planning becomes more manageable. Rolling stock renewal, infrastructure upgrades, service improvements, all can be now aligned under a unified strategy rather than fragmented plans. Sounds great, we all agree. But let's take a closer look. In a move designed to limit inflation, ease the costs of living, and support economic growth, the British government recently decided to freeze rail fares for the first time in 30 years. It is claimed that this move could save commuters more than £300 a year on expensive routes. And according to analysis produced by DFT, it is expected to save rail passengers a total of £600 million. Additionally, the freeze is assumed to stimulate new journeys, which could make sense. It's important to note that this applies only to England and English-based companies and that non-regulated fares such as advance tickets or first-class seats may still be increased. But nonetheless, all operators are planned to come under state control by the end of 2027, and in that sense, the fare freeze is to be considered just as one step of wider plans to rebuild Great British Railways. Great British Railways is a public body which is in the process of being set up, and is part of the government's plans to bring parts of the railway system into public ownership. Also, a DFT operator, Ltd, as the government's public sector owning group, is already formed, and it manages train companies as they move into public ownership ahead of the creation of Great British Railways. For more context, in February 2025, the government's consultation on the Railways Bill outlined plans to set up GBR as a new arm's-length body responsible for rail services and infrastructure. The Railways Bill was introduced in the House of Commons on the 5th of November 2025, and it is expected GBR will become operational around 12 months after the bill receives royal assent. Before the bill becomes law, leaders of Network Rail, DFTO, and the DFT's Rail Services Group are already working together as the so-called shadow Great British Railways established to realize the benefits of rail reform to passengers and freight. Ahead of the formal creation of GBR, the legal turning point besides the Railway Bill was the Passenger Railway Services Act 2024, which made provision for rail passenger services to be provided by public sector operators, instead of by means of franchises. This act enabled the government to deliver its manifesto commitment to bring passenger services into public ownership. What followed is that, on the 4th of December 2024, the government launched the Rail Public Ownership Programme and announced the first services to transfer into public ownership. South Western Railway Services were the first to transfer into public ownership on the 25th of May 2025, followed by C2C services on the 20th of July 2025 and Greater Anglia services on the 12th of October 2025. West Midlands train services will be next to transfer on the 1st of February 2026, and Goya Tang Link Railways will transfer on the 31st of May 2026. The Secretary of State for Transport also outlined the intention for Chiltern Railways and Great Western Railway services to be the subject of transfer. As for the outline of the new system, GBR's sole shareholder and primary funder will be the Secretary of State for Transport, will be headquartered in Derby and will be democratically accountable to British Parliament for its performance. As part of the reform, the Transport Secretary will also publish a long-term rail strategy to set the strategic goals for the railway sector for the next 30 years. The strategy will aim to tackle the long-term issues facing the railway and the country, such as the implications of an aging population, environmental changes, and technological advances. Scottish ministers will then set a rail strategy for Scotland and fund GBR to provide infrastructure in Scotland. A Scottish business plan will be developed to set out GBR's intended activities in Scotland. The exact model of integration between track and train operations there is yet to be determined. There will be a dedicated business unit within GBR for the Wales and Borders area, empowered to partner with Transport for Wales to ensure close collaboration between operations and create a coherent offer for passengers. The Office of Rail and Road will remain to have a robust and independent appeals role set out in legislation to ensure GBR's access and charging decisions are fair, transparent, and consistent with GBR's duties and policies. If GBR makes an unfair decision, the ORR can either send a decision back to GBR for reconsideration or substitute GBR's decision with its own. Let's not forget a strengthened passenger watchdog, a regulatory oversight body which will act as passengers' champion and strive for a better and more inclusive railway. The watchdog will have powers to investigate poor service and demand improvements, as well as ensuring passengers have a clear and accessible service to escalate their complaints. Before jumping to conclusion, we can agree that the GBR might end years of rail market fragmentation in Britain and will help re-establish focus on passengers, including simpler fares and ticketing, if provided with right tools needed to deliver improvement to rail services, including enough funding for operation, maintenance, and long-term investments. This might be a good solution not only for passengers, but also for freight market segment, as less players on the market could mean streamlining operations and better capacity allocation. Especially important for passengers is the fact that instead of having to navigate 14 separate train operators, people will once again simply be able to use the railway one-stop shop. They will travel on GBR trains running on GBR tracks and working to a GBR timetable, or run by a single body in theory focused on their interests. If realized according to plan, this might mean fewer delays, better experience, and a timetable better suited for market needs. Still, there are some concerns we must address. As this reform is indeed one big institutional change, merging track and train management also means shifting a lot of responsibilities, establishing new relations, creating new departments and bodies, and most importantly, changing funding and governance frameworks. Although we must admit that Brits do have experience in rail reform, every reform is risky, complicated, and time-consuming during organizational change of this scale, especially when political pressure is present. And if responsibilities aren't clearly defined at all stages, there's always a risk that day-to-day safety and maintenance standards could just slip. And of course, despite the expectations, public ownership doesn't automatically mean improvement. While reorganization helps with cutting the costs on franchise fees and complexities, the service quality depends more on tags such as investments, good management, long-term planning, and accountability. We don't need to look far into the past to notice trends on the British rail network. For example, since 2018, there have been more than 36,000 signal failures across England, Scotland, and Wales. Over the last 5 years, these failures have caused nearly 1 million minutes of delays for passengers and nearly 15,000 cancelled journeys. There are many track faults, switch points, issues, infrastructure-related disruptions, declines in punctuality, and network-wide performance. All these are just a manifestation of deeper problems, failures in investments, maintenance, and strategy. The so-called modernizing maintenance program meant to cut costs ended up widely condemned. For example, the rail union RMT called it a dangerous and expensive failure. It reportedly cut planned maintenance by 50%, reduced frontline staff, and imposed sweeping changes to working practices without proper agreement. According to the union's post-implementation review, 85% of respondents said infrastructure faults increased under 83% experienced longer delays in fault rectification, and 56% claimed that fabricated fault numbers were being created to gain track access, effectively prioritizing cost-cutting over safety. The cuts also led to a recruitment crisis, deepened skills shortages, damaged working conditions, and increased safety risks. Several serious incidents also occurred. For example, late 2023 saw 4 significant track failures on busy lines. Track faults in general rose significantly in recent years, and temporary speed restrictions were often imposed. Additionally, regulatory assessments from Office of Rail and Road concluded that in certain regions, notably Wales and Western, network performance deteriorated so badly that Network Rail was found in breach of its license for failing to maintain infrastructure. Another story is the so-called CP7 funding program for 2024 to 2029, which is Network Rail's baseline 5-year funding plan required for maintaining and running the UK rail network. Unfortunately, despite supposed efficiency improvements in the first year of program, Network Rail underperformed financially by £243 million. In any case, one could argue that exactly these issues directly contributed to needing the reform, i.e. that this reform was the only way forward. We'd like to believe this is the case. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more railway stories from around the world. To support the channel and gain access to exclusive extras, check out our Patreon page. You can also find our ebook packed with detailed railway insights. The link is in the description below. And if you're into railway-themed merch, we've got you covered there too. See you in the next video.